Hello and welcome to today's Pig at School A-Level Economics podcast, which is going to be about right-wing and left-wing economic theory. If you've heard those phrases before, it's most likely to have been on the news or newspapers, and especially with having two general elections in the last 2 years, 2015 and 2017, hopefully you might have come across these terms. Right-wing economics is basically the belief in less government. Left-wing economics is basically the belief in more government and the varying tax rates and things in between as a very, very broad basis. But I'll take you through some more of that. If you take the last couple of elections as an example and how this translates in terms of policy, the top rate of income tax is a good example. So the top rate of income tax, which is any money people earn over £150,000 a year, so it's not on all of it. If you earned £150,000 and £1, the top rate of income tax would be on that £1. In 2010, when the Labour Party was still in power, that was at 50%. It then went down to 45%. Under the Conservative Party, after 2000, they won the 2010 election, and now it's gone down to 40%. So that top rate of income tax is a good example in that the Conservative Party on the right would say it provides an incentive for you to work. You've earned that money, why shouldn't you spend it? And on the left, it will be more likely saying those people can afford it, we need it to fund public services. Another good example from the last election is the nationalising of the railways. So the Labour Party was saying that our railways are owned by shareholders and private individuals. They used to be owned by the government. The Labour Party wanted to take them back under government control so they could regulate prices, invest. Whereas the Conservative Party is saying, no, you wouldn't get that much investment. There would be government failure. So that wasn't the right thing to do. If we go back through history a little bit, on the left, and when I say left, if you're going very far left, we're looking at Marxists and Marxism. We're not really looking at that. You're going to focus, that would be more focused on in history. But in terms of left of centre and people that believe in more government intervention, one of the most famous is John Maynard Keynes, who was around in the 30s and 40s. He wrote a book called The General Theory. And very broadly, he believed, as I said a bit earlier, in a bit more government intervention. At the time, it was very unnormal. It wasn't the norm for people to believe in government intervention or economists to believe in government interventions. Markets should be left alone. But Keynes believed that in some cases, it would be better for governments to intervene. So for my year 13 students who went through a Keynesian curve at the end of year 12, it differs to our classicalist curve, which we'll get on into a minute, in that you've got at one point, we've got a 90-degree angle. So you've got a flat line and then it goes up, the supply curve. That's because if you're a Keynesian, you believe that there might be spare capacity in the economy. So you might believe that people aren't always working their full hours, underemployment and zero-hour contracts as it is at the moment. You might believe there is unemployment and that the market doesn't always clear. So what that means is that you can boost aggregate demand via cutting taxes, via government spending, without causing inflation. So if you're on the right of the spectrum, we'll get onto in a sec, your big fear is inflation, that if you boost demand, all you're going to do is cause inflation. But if you're a Keynesian, you think if you're on that spare capacity bit of the curve, you can boost AD through government spending or lower taxes, and you wouldn't necessarily incur inflation. This also means they're big believers in the multiplier effect. So the multiplier effect being that any initial increase in spending, so in this example from the government, will lead to a greater increase in national income. So if the government spend money on building a new bridge, for example, they'll have to employ builders, they'll have to get supplies, those builders will buy their lunch nearby, and then that will multiply that initial spending into the local economy. One of the other things that Keynesians believe in is a thing called adaptive expectations. So if you're a right-wing economist, you'll believe in rational expectations that markets always clear very quickly or instantly. If you're a Keynesian, adaptive expectations means that it might take some time. People might factor in things in their decisions. So to give an example of that, if someone has lost their job, if they fix trains are on £50,000 a year, they're made redundant because they're being cutbacks at the company. If you're a right-wing economist, you would believe that you've surveyed all the information, you know what's going on, and you would take the next available job as the best you could. So if that was working for £15,000 a year in a shop, then you would do it. Adaptive expectations says you might take a bit longer. So that says you might wait, you might see if there's other jobs around, so you might spend some of your redundancy money. Currently, or in the last sort of 15 years, some economists who are stressed, they would, I would say, slightly to the left. They're not Marxists or communists or anything, even socialists, but some people we could argue are to the left who might believe in a bit more government intervention, Keynesians or neo-Keynesians, Joseph Stiglitz and Paul Krugman, who have won the Nobel Prize in Economics in the last 15 years, Thomas Piketty, who wrote a book on the distribution of wealth having a big impact on how people get on in the world, and Yanis Varoufakis, who was the Greek finance minister a few years ago. Now, on the right side of economic thinking, they might also be called classicalist economists, neoclassicalists, neoliberals. It all broadly means a similar thing. These are people that believe in less government intervention. So these people believe that markets always work best. Leave the markets to sort things out, sort economics out, and it will work. Some of the most famous ones are Milton Friedman, who was around in the 60s and 70s. He was in what's known as the Chicago School. Friedrich Hayek, who was around before then, in the sort of 30s. And he might also be described as being in the Austrian School. And going way back, Adam Smith, who wrote The Wealth of Nations in 1776. So it's Adam Smith who came upon the idea of the division of labour through a pin factory and the invisible hand you might have heard of. So the invisible hand is that by everyone doing what they want to do, their own selfish interests, actually that leads to what is best for society. So for the year 13s, the AD-AS curves that we've been drawing all year, where your 45-degree angle AS curve and your long-run aggregate supply curve going through it, that is what your neoclassicalists, your right-wing economists believe. So they all believe that markets always clear. So what that means is we haven't got any time waiting around. People know what's going on. People are what's called homo economicus, which means that they've got all information they need. They will make the correct decisions and they will do it quickly or instantly. This means they've got rational expectations. So whereas Keynesians will have adaptive expectations, if you have rational expectations, you will believe that people will make the decisions correctly and quickly with all of the available information. Want to go through a couple of quotes from some of these famous economists. Milton Friedman, you remember, at the Chicago School on the right, a couple from him. He said once, if you put the government in charge of the Sahara Desert, in 5 years' time there would be a shortage of sand. So Milton Friedman was very distrusting of government, believed strongly in government failure. If governments are going to intervene, they wouldn't get it right. It should always be left to the market. Another Friedman quote, I'm in favour of cutting taxes under any circumstance and for any excuse, for any reason, whenever possible. So Friedman believed in low taxes, that he believed that created incentives for people, their own incentives to go to work, and government taking the money from them in income tax or corporation tax from companies was basically just theft, and the government wouldn't know what to do with it anyway. In terms of a Keynesian quote, not a fan of the right-wing ethos. Capitalism is the astounding belief that the most wickedest of men will do the most wickedest of things for the greatest good of everyone. So Keynes was a bit more sceptical of leaving things to the free market and letting people make decisions. Not to say he believed that government should control everything. He didn't, but under certain circumstances it was okay to government intervene. Keynes' probably most famous quote, which is in the long run, we're all dead, was going back to that expectations. If you're on the right wing of the economic spectrum, you believe markets work, you believe markets clear, but Keynes' big question was, how long are we willing to wait? And that came after the depression of the late 20s and early 30s, when the initial reaction of governments, in America especially, was to do nothing. So it wasn't until the New Deal came along and governments spent money and stimulated the economy that things started to get better. So Keynes's big question was, how long can we wait around? How long are people allowed to wait to be unemployed? In recent times, if you go on to do economics at university, you will learn that in the second year especially, it might get a bit mathematical with a thing called econometrics, but there has recently been a fight back from a group of students starting in Manchester called Rethinking Economics. So these students believe that a lot of the economics course left out big bits of theory. So, for example, it left out the world financial crash. It left how financial markets work. They also believed it was too mathematical, too numerical, and that it believed people were this Homo economicus, that they were robots. They had all this correct information. So they've been campaigning for the last 2 or 3 years to change the curriculum to little bits of success, teaching behavioural economics at A level, and doing this podcast about some of the famous historical figures of economics is testament to that. And I want to leave you with a couple of left and right wing economics jokes before a last quote from Friedrich Hayek. Jokes that, if you've been listening, you should understand what they mean now. First of all, how many Keynesians does it take to change a light bulb? Answer: as many as possible. Keep employing people, stimulate the economy, create a multiplier effect. Okay, not the funniest. And on the right side, how many right-wing economists does it take to change a light bulb? None. Leave it to the free market and it will sort itself out. I'll leave you with not exactly an economics quote, but a good quote I think we should all take on in life from Friedrich Hayek, who said, "We shall not grow wiser before we learn that much that we have done was very foolish." You should always learn from your mistakes, students. That's all for today.